This meeting is being recorded.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our guests. My name is Scott Memhard. I am the Ward 1 City Councilor here in Gloucester. This is our Budget and Finance Subcommittee meeting of the City Council. With me is Councillor Tony Gross at large, and we'll be expecting shortly to Councillor at large Jeff Wortley will be joining us. Also, we have our Clerk of Committee, Sherry White, our City Auditor, Kenny Costa, and perhaps Kenny, you could help me introduce the guests we have here with us tonight.
Yes, first guest is Danny Rhodes from Siegel, and then we have Fabrice. Fabrice, can you say your last name?
Camayo.
I'm sorry.
Camayo, Fabrice Camayo.
Okay.
Great. Welcome, both of you.
Thank you.
So this is, as I said, our Budget and Finance Subcommittee meeting. This is a preliminary meeting to our regular meeting, and this is a council meeting of the whole. And Councillor Gilman is here representing other councillors who may also be joining us as well. I would just say that as a hybrid meeting, both in person and accessible remotely through Zoom, we're meeting here in the Gloucester Harbor Master's office. And if you're calling in on a phone, you can press *9 to request to speak. And if you're on a computer or device, there's a raised hand button, which you can tap or press to request to speak. And either of these options are available if you wish to be recognized. I go ahead and turn the agenda over to you, Ken.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So thank you for holding this special meeting. This is very important. This is what is commonly referred to as OPEB, is other post-employment benefits. And we're talking about retiree health insurance. So today we have Danny Rhodes and Fabrice Camayo from the Siegel Company, Siegel Group, and they're here to present the fiscal year 22 OPEB actuarial valuation report. Just the key valuation results, as I noted in my memo, the June 30th, 2022 amount of the liability is $149 million. That's actually a decrease from our last report by actually about $70 million. It's about a 33% decrease. And then also our planned net position at June 30th is 1.3 million. If you recall, at our last meeting, we did contribute 450,000 to that fund, which is a good chunk of money. But however, in the report, there's a actuarial determined contribution amount, which is 8.1 million. So as you know, there is no statutory requirement to fund OPEB at this time. The focus right now is on the pension side. There is a statutory requirement to fund fund the pension, which right now we're on a funding schedule to be funded by 2034. So we've discussed this at BNF previously, where in 2035 and 2036, we'll have a pension windfall. So at that time, I expect the city will be able to make a meaningful contribution to OPEB. And I believe at that time, there may be a statutory requirement to fund OPEB, and we'll be on a funding schedule that'll be mandated. So at this time, I'll turn it over to Danny and to Fabrice to discuss the results of the report. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about the valuation report that we completed last year. But I didn't have time to talk a little bit about the results, kind of where you are, the numbers came out. We have some time for Fabrice to talk about kind of what changed from the last valuation, which was done for 2019.
Breaking up a little.
Mr. Chair, Danielle Rhodes is not coming in very audibly. It seems like it's breaking up and like he's in a tunnel. I don't know if maybe he can.
Is that any better? I'm trying a different microphone here. Is that better?
Yeah, that's better. Maybe a little bit louder.
I can speak up for sure. Yeah, all
Okay.
these Zoom settings seem to be odd on my computer, but, all right. So as Kenny mentioned, he gave some background. We're talking about OPEB, which is other post-employment benefits. And when we say other, we really mean other than pension. So it's all the medical and life insurance benefits that are promised to your retirees after they stop working for the city. There's a couple reasons why we do this valuation. So the first one is for funding purposes. Kenny talked about how much money's been set aside in a trust and to what extent you want to put money in a trust fund to pay those future benefits. Because you put aside the money now, it can grow over time. You can invest it and you have some more money when someone retires to actually pay those benefits. So that's the first purpose, and then kind of flowing from that is accounting. So the GASB, which provides accounting standards for municipal employers, they specify how you have to account for these benefits. And the thinking behind that is, someone works for the city, 30 years later they retire, and rather than suddenly having this liability on your books, to pay these benefits while they're no longer working, the idea is that you have to accrue these benefits in your financial statements over time. So when someone retires, their cost is actually fully accrued, and it doesn't just kind of pop up out of nowhere when they retire. So the two purposes, we do the same valuation for both. We do evaluation every 2 years. GASB says you have to do one at least every 2 years. So it's the same data. Generally the same assumptions and methods. There are a couple differences, but we do the valuation, the funding valuation. That's kind of the first step. That's done every 2 years. And then for the financial statements, you have to report every year. So we do some off-year updates, not a full valuation, but you have to reflect things like the market value of your assets and things like that in the off years. So this particular process, the valuation date was 2021. So that's the date that we collected the data. That's the date that we're running all these liabilities. That's the date that we're producing our funding schedules. And then that was used, so that was done during the course of fiscal 22. It was used to produce the accounting numbers for fiscal 22, and then will also be used for fiscal 23. So there are two reports in the package that Kenny had sent out. I think the accounting one was first, but I think it'd be better to start with the funding one, because that really talks about all the data and all the processes that we use. So I don't know, does everyone have that? Would it be better to share
Is
my
that, are
screen?
you
or-
talking about the one from November or the one from July dated?
I'm talking about the one from November.
The committee
They're
does
both-
have both
they're
reports.
both
I also
November.
did print out a copy. There should be a copy
Okay, so,
next
yeah,
to you.
so it's the first one that you put it in the correct order.
I believe so.
Yeah.
So is it measured, measured June 30th, 2022? Is that the first one you're going over?
No, it's actuarial valuation measured at June 30, 21, dated November 21st.
So it's when you look at the packet that I provided, it's the second report in the back.
Oh, it is.
Can you remind me where exactly that is right now so I can also look at it?
So there's two reports in the packet, and it's the second report. So the first report, there's 18 pages, and then another report begins again, and that report is 32 pages.
Okay, so I can just look on the city website.
Yeah, it's part of
It's in your
the,
packet.
it's in the packet. It's
in the
part of the
Okay.
agenda.
Would it be helpful to share my screen, or should I just call out page numbers?
I would,
Yes,
maybe tell us helpful to
please.
share your screen, please. Yes.
Okay,
Thank you, Daniel.
see if I can do this right.
Oops.
Can everyone see this to section 2?
Yes.
Okay.
Should wait to Gloucester Friends.
All right, so these are the results. This is the liability that you have for OPEB. It's measured a little differently than on the accounting statements, and Kenny threw out some of those numbers, but the main difference is the discount rate that we use to calculate the present value. So I'll put that aside for now, but you know, the measurement in this report is really assuming that you fund these liabilities. So you put aside money in a trust that will be sufficient to pay for all this liability when it comes due. And because that's the underlying assumption here, the discount rate that we're using really reflects the expected return on the assets that you're going to use to fund it. So based on the money that's in that trust and how it's invested and what the expected returns are, we come up with a discount rate, an expected rate of return of 6.75%. Now it's going to be different than the accounting numbers because the accounting standards specify the discount rate that you use, and you have to use really a bond rate, which is a lower rate, and lower discount rates mean higher liabilities. So the numbers here are going to be lower than what we see in the accounting report. But this is kind of, if you see the retirement system valuations, it's not on a similar basis as those. Like, you know, what if you were fully funding, what that liability would be. And so as of June 30, 21, which is when we did this work and collected the data, your liability for OPEB was $97.7 million. That's line 3. And we show it for informational purposes between your retirees. So these are people that have already left service. This is the strict present value of their benefits. And then there's also a number for your active employees, and that measures what they've accrued so far. So if someone starts work tomorrow, they've accrued no benefits. If they retire tomorrow, they've accrued all of their benefits. And as they go through their career, they accrue a piece of it every year. So that's that concept of accruing for the benefit as people work rather than just having it show up. So that number went down from 110 million measured in 2019 down to 97.8. Again, Fabrice can talk about some of the reasons why a little later. But that's the baseline liability. We look at the assets that you have in your trust to support these liabilities. It's about $1 million. That's from a few years of 250,000 or so of funding. It was a little lower in some of the earlier years, but as of 21, you've accumulated just over $1 million. So the unfunded liability is 96.7 million, and the plan is about 1% funded on this basis. So that's your liability, and then the actuarially determined contribution, that's what we say you need to fund in a year to get to a full funding point in the future. And we have a schedule that shows how this all develops over the next 30 years. But to be on course for that, you would need to set aside the number that Kenny mentioned earlier, about 8.1 million. And there's two pieces of that number. There's what we call the normal cost. So that's the accrual for active employees this particular year. So this is fiscal 22. So that's basically what they're earning towards future OPEB in that year. And then there's an amortization payment on the unfunded liability. So you have what people are working on this year, and then there's all that past unfunded liability. That's like your mortgage for the OPEB, and you got to start paying that off. So 2.3 million is what you need to fund for current accruals. 5.8 is for past unfunded, paying that off. Your total is about 8.1 million. Now, to put that in kind of perspective, what you're actually paying in terms of the benefits for retirees, what we call pay as you go, not coming out of the trust, just paying for their premiums, we estimate that to be about 5.3 million for the year. So you can kind of think of the difference between the two as kind of where you are now versus where you need to be at full funding. And then we show another year's worth of it, because again, we only do this exercise every 2 years. We show the fiscal 23 number as well. The next page has kind of a long-term projection, but I guess I'll stop for 1 second and see if there's any questions so far.
Councilor Worthley, yes, please.
Thank you for your presentation. I know there's a lot more coming. I do have a question just before we get too far. On page 9, it's net OPEB liability. I just want to make sure I'm understanding this correctly. as of June 30th of last year, I'm sorry.
Page 9 of which one?
Is that that might be the other report, he hasn't got there yet.
The other report, yeah.
Oh, wait. Where am I on?
You need to be on.
There's two reports, it would be on the
You're in the
second.
June 30th report that we're looking at the November, the second half, or just the November.
I'm looking
21st.
at the,
Move further in.
Is this the one you're looking at that I have on the screen now?
It's,
One minute.
no. It's the second one, yeah,
refresh it over 4 seconds.
it's right here.
Yeah,
It
okay.
should say measured at June 30, 2021. Yeah, actually, that's where he is right now. He was just on this one, he's on here now. But it's this
Yeah, I
report.
just jumped over.
But it's the same question. Luckily, the questions align. If I may.
Yeah,
So, again, looking at, I think it's page 12, is that the page you were just on, valuation results?
Oh, you went back to your page
So, yeah,
9.
I'm gonna go back. Yes, page 12.
So funded ratio, line 6. Is this correct that we've only funded 1.06%, so about 1% of our liability?
Correct.
Because we're funding the retirement,
Right,
and we don't
Yeah.
have to fund this yet.
sort of jaw dropping in some ways, right?
always.
Well, we have
I'm not saying what priorities we shouldn't have.
11 more years, and then that one's gone, and then we could just dump that money on this heavily.
So we talked about that at the beginning of the meeting.
Yeah.
We talked about how there's a statutory authority to pay the pension assessment, which you see annually in the budget.
By 2034?
Correct. And then 2035, 36, we're anticipating, we're hopeful that we'll have a pension windfall. And then we can make a more meaningful, because right now we're contributing 450,000. I can tell you, right around 2011, 2012, we established an OPEB trust at that time, and we contributed 50,000.
Mhm.
So now we're at 450,000 the last 2 years. So, we're making more meaningful, but there's no statutory authority to fully fund, the annual contribution at this time. But we do expect that perhaps in, maybe 2034, 2035, where, and just, this is not something that is just to us, to the city. This is a Commonwealth, this is across the country issue with OPEB. This is not something just particular to the city. This is something that a lot of communities are facing. I think there's only one community that's fully funded in Massachusetts, and I believe that's West Newbury, from the last that I've heard.
I've seen the report that shows how we stack up against all the other communities in terms of the pension program. Where do we stand relative to the other communities in the Commonwealth? We're 1% funded or 99% unfunded, right? So where are we in that list? Are we at the bottom or are we at the top? or in the
Danny
middle?
can speak up, but I would say we're probably somewhere in the middle. I mean, I would say there's like maybe, there's like 1% that's fully funded. I think there's still a handful of communities that have done nothing. They haven't even established an OPEB trust. They haven't even contributed. I can tell you, I remember even before there was less legislation. So this is under chapter 32, that there was even a home rule petition. I can tell you the town of Wellesley, they had a home rule petition, and they created a stabilization account, and they were funding $2 million back in, let's say, 2006, 2007 timeframe. So there's some communities that were, very ahead of the game. There's some communities that still haven't done anything, like it doesn't even exist, but I think we're somewhere in the middle. I think, and I think once we become fully funded in the pension, I think we can make meaningful contributions, but I think we need to, realize that and keep the discussion. And this is something that we have been talking about annually, either through because Danny Rose has presented in front of you before to this committee, to the Budget and Finance Committee.
Yeah.
And then Tony Roselli as well has presented. So this is something that, we need to be mindful of.
I'm glad we're doing
address.
this. It's a little daunting. A little daunting, right? Is that a good fair word to use?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. But Jeff, it's 98.94.
Oh, I'm sorry,
Not
98.94. Every penny does count, right? And it's just, it's kind of, maybe daunting's not just the word, it's alarming, right? We have a long ways to go. We have a limited pool of money to work with to fund this, and this is an obligation we have.
Yeah, but literally, we're all in the same boat on this, meaning like other communities, we're all facing, and
Yeah,
just, you know, the rating agencies, they understand, they know. I mean, they, by us just establishing the trust fund, having a plan, you know, having, you know, contributing we're doing something.
Mhm.
You know, and that's what they're looking for. Would they love for us to contribute 8.1 million? Yes, but we just, you know, we're just not, we just can't do that at this time.
Deep breath. Okay,
Dina, would you?
thank you.
Dina, would you say that's a fair assessment, what I just covered?
Yeah, I would say so. So I'd say at this point, certainly the large majority of communities have set up trusts. Most of them are not on a schedule to fully fund this. I mean, there are others that, like you said, Kenny, that once they deal with their pension obligation and have that fully funded, they have a plan to start diverting that money, the money that was allocated to pay off that unfunded to move to OPEB. I think Boston actually has a plan sort of like that. You know, my guess is the average community is probably, I don't know, in the 10 to 20% funded range at this point. So they have been putting aside some money, but they're certainly nowhere near full funding. I mean, like you mentioned, Wellesley, we've been their actuaries for a long time. They've set this up a long time ago, and they're pretty close. You know, we have a couple others that are pretty close, but we have a lot that aren't. And we work with some where, you're right, they're not doing anything. We're only doing the accounting numbers because they have no plan for funding, no assets.
Is there a report that shows where we, if you don't mind, I'm sorry, where we rank compared to the other? I don't think it's the 351 season. I think there's probably some retirement groups that are combined communities, but whatever the number is, I think it's 275, I think. Is there a report that shows where we stand compared to the others? There might be some things we can learn from that.
I do know that PERAC has tried to get some of that data, and they published one version of the report a year or two ago. I don't know if they've updated it. You know, PERAC doesn't strictly you know, manage the retirement systems, not the OPEB, but they've tried to do that just to pull information. So I haven't seen it recently, but it does have, you know, they've gone to all the cities, towns, and their actuaries to get numbers. I mean, it's a little harder because there's more variables in terms of healthcare, you know, plan design. So it's a little tougher to compare things, you know, directly from town to town. But there's been some effort to try to gather that.
I do have lots of questions, but I'm not going to hold up your presentation any longer at this moment. If that's all right.
Thank you.
So I'll go to one more page here. This is the long-term projection of that actuarially determined contribution. So this is really kind of what we see, how the plan would develop over the next, I guess we're down to 26 years here. So the columns here, so the first couple columns, this is the information we saw on the prior page, just projected down for future years. So that first 2022, the ADC is the 8.1 million that we saw earlier. It goes to 8.5 and it increases. So the normal cost, column one, that's just going to keep growing because healthcare trends keep increasing. You keep hiring people, so there's new people to accrue the benefits. And then the amortization, that's really, you know, the mortgage payment that's set up to increase over time, but to get you paid off at the end of this period. So kind of how it would work in terms of funding. So the first year, we're saying the ADC, column 3 is 8.1 million. You're already paying 5.3 million in premium. So the difference would go into the trust. It's a little fudge for 22 because we knew that you were putting in 450,000. So we put in the actual number there since we knew it. But if you look at future years, the difference between the ADC and the benefits that you're paying out, you know, just sort of your general revenues, health insurance, that difference is what you need to contribute to the trust. So we're saying for fiscal 23, it'd be 2.8 million. That's kind of level. It starts to go down over time. But the idea is at the end of this period, that money, those contributions, they all go into the trust. Your assets grow in column 6. Your liabilities also grow, but not quite as fast. and your unfunded liability at the end of this period, 26 years, is 0. So what would happen after this point is just like kind of on your pension, you'd sort of get a windfall. So instead of paying those premiums, column 4, so instead of paying 16, 17 million at that point, you keep paying that normal cost, column 1, but your amortization payment would go away. You've paid off your liability. So the idea of it is that starting in 2048, you can put in 5 million, let that grow as people work, and then you'd have the money when they retire, 16, 17 million to pay your benefits. So right now you're putting in excess of what the retirees, what you're paying for the retirees, but at some point that would stop and you would just be funding people as they work and have the money set aside by the time they retire.
Yes, a question.
Sorry, was there a question?
Yes,
I think I just want to make sure I heard you right. You said that if we put in 5 million, that asset grows and then our costs reduce, but you have us putting in 450 last year and 2.8 million this year. What happens if we don't put $2.8 million? Doesn't that just completely throw this whole projection off
Yes.
considerably?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is kind of our baseline of, if you want it to be fully funded at the end of this period, and we kept the same period as last time, so it's 2 years closer, how much would you need to set aside? So this is not reflecting what you're actually going to do. And certainly if you wanted to, we could do other modeling if you wanted to see actual, what you could actually budget. But for now, this is kind of what we think is the baseline to get this liability fully funded.
right.
But I just don't know, is it even realistic to be looking at 26 years out, where if we don't put in $2.8 million this year, I mean, that's going to be a dramatically different number when you look at it over the long haul. Like these numbers look great, right? But they look terrible if we don't do it.
This is a model that we're sort of backing into. Yes. This is a roadmap for how to accomplish the end game in the timeframe. Is that correct, Kenny?
Yes, yeah. Yeah, so every 2 years, when we have a full valuation, these numbers are regenerated, they're recalculated. And just another thing too, with the OPEB trust, so the OPEB trust, in the future, when we do use the OPEB trust, we can only use it for retiree health insurance. We can't take that money out and decide, what, we're going to use that on something else, on another, municipal expense, or for example, to pave roads or to do something else. So any dollar that does come out of the OPEB trust has to be used for retiree health insurance.
So on this report, line 1, 2022 says assets end of the year $1.3 million. That's a projected asset. What is our asset now?
Our asset now is, in this report is about $1 million, a little bit over. We have 1.3, we just contributed another 450,000 last meeting. So we're right around like 1.7 million right now.
Oh, so the end of 2022, we did have 1.3 million.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
That's the actual number, because we didn't know it at the time. We did the report in November, so we knew the number, and that matches the other report, that goes in your financial statements.
So earlier, when we first opened the trust, we were only contributing like $50,000, like back in 2012. So we've gradually increased 50,000. I believe we were at 100 and 150, and I think even at 250 at one point. Now we're at 450. And I think we've done 450 the last 2 years.
Did we just change our guidelines for free cash to put, I think 5% of it into this OPEB?
No, I think we just decided a flat amount. I think we just decided 450. That was roads. Yes.
Oh, right, sorry. Thank you.
10% out of 2 different funds.
Right.
Correct.
Again, sorry to take up time. This is helpful. Thank you.
Yep, good questions. Thank you.
So, like I said, I
Okay.
mean, this is the baseline model, so it probably doesn't reflect reality in the short term, but on the other hand, it doesn't reflect any bump in I forget what the year 2033 or whenever the retirement system gets funded. So, in reality, maybe you'll have much lower numbers in the first couple of years, but you'll have a lot more coming in at some point in the future. So, if you wanted to see any sort of modeling of different contributions or anything, we could certainly do that. It's just, you got to kind of start somewhere. So this is basically saying, let's take out the mortgage and pay it off over 20, 25 years and how much you'd have to set aside, knowing that's not necessarily what's going to actually happen. So, those are the key numbers from the valuation. I know time is limited and I don't know if there's other questions. We could talk a bit about the changes from the prior. We could talk about the accounting report. I don't know if people have other questions, but, kind of happy to do this however, you
No,
think.
we should keep, we have another 25 minutes allotted here, so we should keep
Okay.
going by what you have in mind.
Okay, I think it would be useful to talk a bit about kind of how the numbers have changed in the prior year. So I think Fabrice has a couple comments there. Just kind of how we got from the 110 in 2019 to the 96 now.
Okay, so can you guys hear me?
Yes, Fabrice, what page?
We are here on page 6.
Okay, thank you.
It's still that second report. So the most recent funding valuation that we have done for the city of Gloucester is as of June 30, 2021. And then we had an unfunded liability of 96 million. 2 years ago, we had the unfunded liability at 110 million. We had expected that number originally to increase by 8.6 million to 118.7 million. However, the actual came out to be a lot lower, and that's because of a lot of change of assumption that we have done in this valuation. The main driver here, and that decrease that we see here is 21 million. It's 21.9 is running to 22. And the main driver here is the update of the per capita cost and contribution. And that's the major responsible here for about 20 million of that decrease. We also have other factors contributing in the gain in this decrease. So we have the update of the future trends that we use on those per capita cost and contribution. We have also updated the mortality assumption. We have updated the percent merit assumption. And also we have an investment gain of about 80,000. But again, here we're looking at the June 30, 2021 numbers. In the following year, as of June 30, 2022, we have observed an investment loss. And you can see that in the other report that, the first report that you have in your packet. All of these gain were slightly offset by an experienced loss of 1.2 million. And that is mainly due because of the increase in count. So we have a little bit more retirees now compared to the prior valuation, and a little bit more actives compared to the prior valuation. So I guess now I can send it back to Danny.
Yeah,
Unless there's any questions on this.
1 minute, Councillor Worthy had an additional question for you,
The
please.
question is just on that piece. Can you tell me what you mentioned the $20 million difference was because you're updating per capita cost and contributions. Can you tell me what that really means? Not really, what it means for someone who doesn't know what it means?
yeah, I mean, it's really what is healthcare cost now, and this is entirely driven by the plans in the GIC, because that's the city participates in the GIC. We know that the GIC does a pretty good job of keeping costs under control. They're constantly making plan design changes and putting their healthcare insurers out to bid. And they have historically done a pretty good job of keeping keeping healthcare costs below what our trend assumption, what we think it's going to be. And part of that is they have the ability to make a lot of changes, and they obviously spend a lot of time looking at that. But, part of it is they do make plan design changes and they do things that when we do our valuation, we can't necessarily bank on. So we have kind of a standard model of what we think healthcare costs will do. And it's kind of complicated. I mean, there's sort of the short term, what is healthcare next year? But then there's also a real long-term assumption of, what is healthcare as a percent of GDP and how does inflation fall into that and more people consuming more healthcare services over time. And so, so we have this long-term model that, it's the best we can do. Predicting healthcare costs is not easy. We have a framework to do it. And what we find is, especially in this last period, the GIC has really beat the benchmark there. They've come in, the costs that they have been lower than what our assumptions were. And we've seen this pretty consistently. They tend to do, because they can make these changes, they tend to every time we look at this, every 2 years, they tend to be lower than where we would have projected because of all these changes. So you're right, it's by far the biggest driver. Everything else, I mean, we update our assumptions, look at the data, but you kind of see from these numbers, a lot of that is just noise compared to what is healthcare cost. I mean, that's the biggest question, and that's really the hardest thing to get our hands around as OPEB actuaries, just because healthcare is such a difficult, volatile market, and it's hard to know how much things will cost next year, much less 30 years from now.
And then the 79,000, just kind of 80,000 investment gain, that means our liability went down by 80,000 because of gains in the market through June of 2021. This is now 19 months later. And I gotta imagine that that's a different number now over the last year.
Yeah.
Right. Do we know what that number would be at this point, or do we need to do a whole other evaluation?
Yeah, we would have to do another. So next year, just from next year, we have a roll forward. And then the year after, we'll have a full valuation and we'll have a brand new report, that will include that. But we'll see, depending on the market. And if
Right.
at this point, I would say it's probably going to be a loss.
Yeah.
I mean,
good.
certainly,
That's my guess.
we know from the accounting report, the other report, page 12, we know at June 30, 22, you had an investment loss of about 164,000. So, I mean, you're kind of thinking, rough math, you've got $1 million, you expect it to return 6%. So you expect 60, 70,000 in 2021, you beat that, which is why we had a gain. In 22, you did not meet it, a 60,000 expected versus 160,000 loss. You had a $230,000 loss, so expected versus actual. I don't have numbers as of today, but we still got this fiscal year, 5 more months, so maybe things will turn around.
Oh. Okay.
Okay. We're back in your gentleman's hands again.
All right. So those are the key assumptions. Let me see if there's anything else in the report. We do just kind of show how the trust fund is developed over time. So Kenny mentioned for fiscal 20 and fiscal 21, you had 250,000 come in. You had a kind of a small investment income at June 30, 20. That was, a couple months after COVID hit and the markets were kind of unstable. So there not much gain there. Things did come back in 21, and then when we do this next time, you'll see the loss in 22. I don't think there's much else in this report. One thing that we do provide, just sort of for informational purposes, is we get the department codes for each employee. So we've always shown the sewer and water piece of the liability versus the total. I'm not sure if some communities kind of fund based on this, so they can, build the OPEB charge into their water rates or things like that. I'm not sure if Gloucester does that, but we certainly work with some that do that.
Not yet.
So
Not yet.
not yet.
Not yet.
So it does happen, and so we do provide this information for a lot of our clients, just so they can see. Sometimes they want to see the school separated, or they have other, funds or departments that they want to see, but really just for informational purposes.
Danny,
Sorry.
Danny, the only thing I was just gonna add, so we don't do it as far as like indirect costs, but we do present it in the financial statements in this manner.
Okay,
So that's why we do ask for the breakout on water and sewer.
okay. And, you know, really the rest of this report just gets into all the details about the data. I mean, Fabrice mentioned we had you know, slightly more people covered than the 19 valuation, so we had a little increase in liability due to that. We go through all of our assumptions in detail. You know, not much changes year to year. We look to the retirement system for assumptions about, you know, how long people will live and when they'll retire, those sorts of things. So these kind of match the retirement system. We also have to pull in data from the teacher's retirement because unlike the pension, your OPEB plan includes teachers. The retirement system doesn't. So we have different assumptions for them. So a lot of disclosure. We have to say everything that we did. And then we talk about here just you know, what the average cost is for covering a retiree. One thing to note here is that part of the actuarial standards say because healthcare costs increase as people get older, you know, no surprise, you have to account for that in your evaluation, even if you don't pay for it that way. So what do I mean? So the GIC sends you a bill, and you know, for each plan there's a premium rate, and the city pays their share. But built into that, especially for retirees who aren't eligible for Medicare, you have people who are, you know, 25 years old, just started working, and you have people who are 64 years old and been retired for a while. Their underlying costs are very different, even though you pay the same premium for them. When we do our valuation, and GASB says you have to do this, the actuarial standards say you have to do this, you have to sort of measure what that impact is. So when we say you're paying whatever it was 5.4 million in benefits, it's probably less than the check you're writing to the GIC because it does account for that, what we call subsidy, an implicit subsidy. So that's just kind of information. There is a big change at age 65 because that's when Medicare kicks in. You know, generally people are eligible for Medicare at 65, but you know, you may have some people who were hired years ago who never paid into Medicare. Those didn't become mandatory until the mid 80s. So you do have some retirees who are over 65 and are not going to get Medicare. So you have to cover them in your, what we call the non-Medicare plans. And as you can see, it's much more expensive to provide care that way because Medicare, you know, covers such a big part of the cost. And these are the trend assumptions. Honestly, we look to the Commonwealth, since these are all GIC assumptions. We look to them to provide some of their thoughts on what healthcare will do because, you know, they manage that plan. So we kind of steal some of that from them since their actuaries are looking into that. So that's the funding report. I think those are the key areas. So happy to talk about the accounting one for a few minutes if you want, or if there's any other questions, you can address them now.
Questions in the accounting one.
So let's move on to the accounting report. We only have 15 odd minutes left here.
Okay. So that was the other report that was in there, the first one. So like I mentioned, the basis of these numbers is the same as the funding valuation. We do project things forward because you have to measure the liabilities at the end of the fiscal year. So the 2021 valuation is done for 2022 and 2023 financial reporting, and the prior valuation had the 21 financial reporting numbers. And we'll use this again next year. Generally, the assumptions and methods are the same, but there's one key difference that I want to talk about, and we can go to the summary here on page 12. So I mentioned earlier on the funding valuation, the discount rate we use, and there we use 6.75%, which is what we think based on where your money's invested, what the long-term rate of return will be for that portfolio in the OPEB trust. GASB has slightly different rules. So they say, if you really are fully funded or have a plan to get to fully funding, use that discount rate, that's fine. But if you don't, and in this case, because you're only about 1% funded, you don't really qualify for that. It says you have to use a discount rate that's related to basically a municipal bond index. So rather than having this money invested in a trust and growing over time to pay for it, it's kind of a market-based, what you'd have to go borrow now in the bond market to pay for these liabilities. And that number's lower. And that number, it's an index as of a certain date, so it bounces around quite a bit. The interest rates in 2019, 2020 were very low, and lower rates mean higher liabilities because it's less future earnings to pay for these benefits. And then that started to turn around over course of 2022. Interest rates have gone up. These index rates have gone up. So you actually had a very big increase in this rate. It went from 2.16 as of June 30, 21 to 3.54 as of June 30, 22. And that's huge. That was, alone, probably $70–80 million of the change in liability. So if you go back to what Fabrice was talking about when he went through his numbers and how the numbers changed from the prior valuation, these assumption changes were only like in the 20 million range. The reason why it's so much higher here is, in addition to that, we include that change in discount rate, which, like I said, was a huge number. Unfortunately, you don't really have a lot of control over that number. GASB says you have to use this market-based index rate. It is what it is. It comes out every week. So whatever it was at June 30, that's the number we used. And until you really get this liability funded, at least under the current standards, that's kind of what you have to do. As you accumulate money, and there are points where you could do sort of a blend of the two rates, but you're kind of honestly a ways out from that point. So you're really looking at this bond rate for the foreseeable future. So the accounting liabilities using that lower discount rate are the 149, almost 150 million, and they were 200 million in 2021 versus the 110 million going down to 90 million that we talked about in the other valuation. So this is how it gets reported on your financial statements versus kind of the other report, which is how you fund and manage the plan. So this is what gets disclosed. You also show what they call plan fiduciary net position. These are your assets. So the money that goes into the trust, well, the money that you pay in benefits, which kind of goes right back out, the additional money you put into the trust, and any investment gains or losses on that. Then the difference is your net OPEB liability. And then we show similar measures. There's the funded percentage, which on this basis is less than 1%. And then you also have to disclose relative to your total payroll what your liability is. And so it's about 240% of your payroll, which was estimated about 60 million. So it's kind of a way to compare across communities, liabilities versus payroll.
Councilor Gross?
Daniel, I have a question here on the, the changes of, the 85 million, and then we go down to the 149 million compared to, now, the way you just explained it, that's bad. Is that correct? Because when I see a liability go down, I think that is good.
No, I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying that it's somewhat artificial because you're measuring it as at this discount rate. But so the change from 21 to 22 was good because you had a big increase in this rate, which drives the liability down. But it's really the 21 numbers that are relevant. So the number we had in the prior report, the 90 million, whatever it was, I mean, that's compared to 223 million here at 2021. So in terms of what's bad or good, I mean, that's kind of the disconnect on the GASB rules, your liability is 220 million versus your, more like 100 million on the funding rules.
So,
And these numbers here actually go in our financial statements, and this is what the bond rating, and this is what we publish out to the public. So my eyes always go, towards these numbers because this is what's public.
Yeah.
becomes public.
so these aren't real. This is not a real liability at 149, 572, 683 million as of July 30th, 2022. That's not a real number for our liabilities, correct?
I mean, real is kind of a loaded term, I guess. I mean, it's real in the sense that if let's say the Commonwealth made a rule that you had to fully fund these liabilities tomorrow, and you had to go out and borrow money in the bond market to do it, you'd look at that index rate because that's kind of your cost of borrowing. It's going to be a lot different than if you set aside this money and let it grow over time to pay off those liabilities. So it's a different way of measuring it. The accounting standards are really like market-based, and you got to kind of mark everything to market at the end of the fiscal year, versus the other report, which is really what's the long-term funding plan, and under that plan you're setting aside money, it's growing over time, so you can use a different method for getting that present value.
Councilor Worthy?
Just a couple more questions. I think I read
Everybody, I have to wrap up because I have to go to my 5:30 meeting here at the Tech. So thank you very much. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor.
I think I saw in here about 1,700 participants. Does that include active employees and retired employees? Is that right?
And teachers, yes.
And teachers. Where's the break point for when part-time employees get health insurance back? Is it 20 hours?
Yes.
So,
Can I just add one more thing?
Sure.
So as far as with the GIC, they also need to be in the Gloucester retirement system as well in order to qualify for GIC.
so part-time employees at 20 hours per week can be in the retirement program and the health insurance. Okay.
Provided they fit the criteria for the retirement program.
Yeah, membership, yep.
Would there be value, and I think this is probably collective bargaining, a whole bunch of things, in raising the threshold for participation in the health insurance above just 20 hours? Would that change the?
We've already done that. We did that years ago, then we lowered it down to 20.
Lower down to 20.
Correct. We at one point at the retirement board, we had it at, I think it was about 30 hours. But then a lot of members attended our meeting and they wanted it to be reduced. So we did reduce it down to 20. There was a lot of support to reduce it, yes, to reduce it down to 20.
Something to consider, I think,
Good evening.
as hard as it might be.
We're just in the thick of our OPEB liabilities. I'm sure you're
Just about at the end.
thrilled of it, yeah.
Do survivors benefits, is that covered in here as well?
Yes.
Okay. And is that someone who chooses option A? If they choose option A in the pension program, which does not include pension continuation for the spouse, are they still eligible to be part of the OPEB benefits? Someone retires, they choose option A, which means their pension does not continue to their spouse. Does the OPEB obligation continue to the spouse?
So there, you're seeing if it's a survivor.
Right.
Yes.
Does it include people who are paying out of pocket for the benefits going forward? Does a survivor pay out of pocket be still in the program?
Yes. So there are on the school side and the city side where they do pay like over the counter.
Do we know what those numbers are? And does it make sense to even look at whether that benefit makes sense? Obviously, people who are in the system now continue the benefit, but going forward, is that something we should even be looking at? I don't know who that question is for. I'll just throw it out there and whoever can answer that. Please do.
I think typically what we do is and you correct if I'm wrong, I mean, they're receiving the benefit. So what we try to do is we try not to harm the spouse.
Mhm.
So I think, because the thing is, there is a pension check, so there's a deduction. However, when that, as you said, the option A, once that pension goes away, I think we try not to harm, the spouse. And I think what we do is we ask them to pay over the counter. We do that both on the city and the school side.
And they write a check to the city every month for that?
Correct, yes.
Okay.
That's really getting into the nitty gritty
Yeah.
level rather than the big picture, which is, I think, what we're trying to wrap up on right now.
Yeah, I mean, it does play into, I mean, you only, I guess.
There's a lot of
we wanna-
assumptions,
Yeah,
a
we
lot of
want to hire
variables.
healthy people that, stay healthy and then die quickly, right? I hate to say it, but that's like the math of it works, that we need to be really thoughtful about our benefits going forward.
That's not something we're in control of here ourselves.
No,
so
we aren't, and we're yet,
Somebody else is.
and yet we have the responsibility to fund it. So it's challenging.
The city.
Well, budget and finance has to.
Long
but
term.
This is challenging. Thank you for the information. There's a lot here, and I would love to dig into this even more when the time's right. But I'm very grateful.
Thank you, Dane. Thank you, Fabrice, for your time.
You're quite welcome.
Good.
Yeah,
And I
it's
just hope the committee found this to be helpful.
mind-boggling numbers, but it is helpful for your, to understand some of what the process is involved in getting here and how we've gotten here and how we're gonna dig ourselves out.
Right. Well, if I could ask, is there a role that you see a local city council playing in trying to, and we're on the legislative side and we approve funding, but do we have a role to play in attacking this challenge, or is it really just a function of waiting for the mayor to send us something and responding? to
I think our responsibility is to be aware of it and see how it factors into the big picture, because it clearly impacts our borrowing as a city,
Right.
the rates, and having a plan in place is
But we don't sit at any bargaining tables. We
No.
don't sit at the retirement board. We don't sit at anything that actually makes these decisions.
Right.
So.
So it's kind of like,
No, thank you for the information.
thanks for the information, and we can't do anything about it, but obviously be aware of it. Makes sense.
I think, at some level, if you're gonna try and make any kind of changes, you probably have to make the changes through PERAC. So you're gonna need a big magic wand for that to happen. So,
Big.
I mean,
Well,
yeah, real
yeah,
big.
really big.
And,
It's
with all,
females, but.
all the
Few days, Jeff.
retirement boards,
Suggest your proposal.
the state, the
What's
teachers,
that?
all
Suggest your
work under the
proposal,
same
Rick.
rules and regulations that are established by state law.
Chapter 32.
Do we need a motion to adjourn out of this meeting before we go into the next?
anyone so interested in this, make such a motion?
So moved.
Yeah.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you again, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Good night.
Right.
We want to go off